think it's a pretty good kind of punctuation on Tennessee, Alabama. The thing you mentioned at the end is a pretty good segue because you talked about, I mentioned how I think Tennessee can walk the rest of the way through their schedule and games they'll be favored. Well, Ole Miss was favored this weekend against Arkansas. And I think Arkansas fans who listen to this show will feel pretty good about themselves right about now because we haven't been as high on them as we have Ole Miss this year. And in this game, beyond just being a really fun watch, I don't care if you're a fan or not, that game was one that you need to be watching more than Ohio State, Wisconsin, which was pretty dull, even in overtime. But I think what we saw here is exactly what we talked about going into the game. Austin Allen really good, Chad Kelly really good, both defenses really bad. But what really kind of stuck out to me was Arkansas hasn't been able to run it all year. Ole Miss, coming into this game, had a very low, poor ranked run defense, and it turned out their run defense was worse than Arkansas's offensive running game was bad. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, Alabama, when they beat Ole Miss, didn't really throw the ball much. They beat Ole Miss by running it and wearing them down, and that's what we saw here. And I'll give you, to harp on something that, I almost have to apologize to our listeners, but I'm not going to because it is the trend of the season. Again, there's a huge divide between the statistics between the quarterbacks and the running backs rushing in this game. Now, in this case, it isn't necessarily such a bad thing, but the thing that sticks out to me, when you listen to the chatter afterwards, it's, Ole Miss rushed for 4.8 yards a carry. Arkansas only rushed for 3.9. It's very much one of those but moments. Yeah, Arkansas rushed for less per carry than Ole Miss, but that's only when you focus on things in terms of college stats where sacks count as rush totals. Ole Miss could not run the ball with running backs. Their running backs averaged about 3.5 yards per carry. Their rush totals came because their leading rusher in this game was Chad Kelly with 14 carries for 6.4 yards. They had 14 carries by Kelly and 17 carries by everybody else. And Kelly averaged double the yard per carry average that the running backs actually did. Arkansas was the exact opposite. Allen is not a dual-threat quarterback. He had negative 24 yards on 6 carries. Again, most of those were sacks. But the actual backs, Whaley and Williams, averaged over 6 yards a carry. So when Arkansas wanted to run it in a traditional sense, they were able to very successfully through the entire game. The box score, that single-line stat really doesn't reflect the way the rush totals went. Ole Miss's rushing was almost entirely scrambles, and conversely, Arkansas's was greatly buoyed because they had several large sack plays that lowered their per carry averages.
And for me, watching this game, it was the second scoring drive for Arkansas. It was like a 53-yard run from Raleigh Williams, and I thought, okay, Arkansas's already had some success against some good teams without having the ability to run the ball. They've had to throw it. They're running 2 yards a carry, 3 yards a carry, not being really effective and still scoring points just because Allen is playing that well, just because his receivers and Sprinkle are playing that well. So I thought early on, if Ole Miss allows Arkansas to run the ball, which is a lot less variable in terms of offense, then they're in trouble. And the flip side of that, we talked about this during the game, the style of offense that Ole Miss runs, which, this thing kind of reared its ugly head where they don't run the ball, they're not comfortable with it. It's kind of I guess they were faking it a little bit earlier in the season. When you're relying on Chad Kelly to throw it 40 times a game, and it's predicated on a lot of home run stuff, some days it's there and you can put up 40 points on Alabama, and some days it's not. And you got to scramble and scratch and claw because you're relying on a lot of high-risk, high-reward stuff, whereas Arkansas is buoyed by a run game that, again, hasn't been great, but when it is great in this game, it's a lot less variable and a lot more reliable.
Right. Both of us said that going into this. Ole Miss's style of offense is intentionally volatile. It is a great style of offense. If you take a average team and you want to make them a 9 or 10 win team, which is what happened when they got Hugh Freeze, frankly, it's a very poor offense if you want to win a national title or go to a conference championship game. Because for every game where you're going to rise up and beat somebody that you shouldn't, and there'll be a number of those throughout the season, there's going to be a couple games where you're just not on the same page. You drop some passes, the quarterback's off target, and when Ole Miss takes a lot of deep shots on third down, that kind of thing. If you're throwing the ball 40 yards on third down, it's normally a low percentage play. Now, if your quarterback's on, and at times Kelly can be, all of a sudden you connect on a 40-yard play, you get momentum, you drive down the field, you score, and you can beat an Alabama doing that. But when you're off and you throw on third down on a 3rd and 2, it doesn't matter who you're playing. If you can't execute that play at a very high level, then you aren't going to complete the pass and you're going to end up punting. And like you said, running the ball is a much more consistent thing. I've always, we haven't really talked about this a whole lot this year, but I've always been of the opinion that if you're a championship team, you want to be running the ball. Because if you can run the ball for 5 to 8 yards a carry, you can beat anyone on your schedule. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to necessarily beat the best team, but you're going to beat the teams that are worse than you. If you can consistently run the ball at 6 yards per carry or more, you're just going to grind them down and you're going to be able to consistently score points. If you have to throw the ball, and we see this a lot with, like Baylor, you're going to have some random game where it just doesn't pan out. And I think one of the notable things here in this game is Arkansas wasn't in a lot of ways better than Ole Miss, but Arkansas could consistently run the ball and keep pressure on the Ole Miss offense. And because of that, it's strangely enough, I think Arkansas is better suited for the shootout. As the score continues to climb, because Arkansas can continue to run the ball and move the sticks, they're going to be able to keep scoring, and they're going to be able to keep scoring. Conversely, Ole Miss, it doesn't matter, if they're up 10 or they're up 40, they have about the same amount of pressure to score and the same difficulty doing so. And in a game where it's a shootout, and this really wasn't that much of a shootout, but if you follow me, I'm kind of talking down the road. If Ole Miss has to put up 50 points in a ball game, the nature of their offense is they're almost guaranteed to put up 20 or 30 on some big plays, but those big plays are also just as much likely to not be executed properly, and they're going to miss some drives. And I think that's kind of what happened at the end of this game. They had some opportunities to not just win, but almost run away with it that they didn't manage to execute. And they may have put up 30 points on anybody in the conference in this game, but it turns out Arkansas is a poor defense, so 30 points wasn't all that impressive, and they needed at least 35. So, I think that's the way it shakes out. And I'll tell you an interesting stat here too that's kind of fascinating to me. The tight ends for both teams are very heavily regarded, right? Ingram was the leading receiver for Ole Miss with 111 yards. He had almost double anybody else. Sprinkle was the lowest receiver for Arkansas. He only had 5 yards on one reception.
I thought that was really weird, and they kept pointing that out in the broadcast. It was like they kept saying, all right, so Sprinkle's been quiet. Now's his time, or we're on the goal line. This is a good opportunity for Sprinkle, and he just never showed up.
Right, and I think the answer there is that Ole Miss was trying to force what they wanted to do to work the whole game, and that's, again, the style of their offense is to force it to work, and they're just going to take the shot and try to make sure it happens. Arkansas, on the other hand, was taking what was available to them with their receivers, and they just sort of executed their game plan with the defense that was put in front of them, and I think that's why they walked away with a W.
It's interesting what you talked about in terms of how Ole Miss operates and their kind of mindset in this game, because I felt like watching this game, Ole Miss always expected to win and just ran out of time. Like, they were kind of messing around in the second half, and oh, by the way, we need to score, and we're down to our last drive. So it was really, they didn't even seem to have a lot of sense of urgency on that last drive. And, we're talking about how Arkansas was consistent in terms of their offensive approach, and Ole Miss wasn't. Ole Miss had a lot of short drives in the second half, a lot of 3-and-outs, had another 5-play drive. I think there's a lot there. I just wonder how much, and this isn't a knock on Arkansas, they won the game, they earned it 100%, but I wonder how much of this game reflects how poor Ole Miss's run defense is versus whether or not Arkansas has found something in the run game, and I'll piggyback that with a question to you. Are we getting to where we accept as a thing Bielema coach teams getting better as the season goes on? Because I think this is like 3 years in a row where they started off struggling with some cupcake, and then halfway through the season they're like really good and nobody wants to play them.
You know, at some point you have to give some credence to the pattern, right? I mean, it seems to be the way it works out. They get better as the season goes on. You know, it's a bit of a cliche, but it may well be true as a product of their offensive line. Both of us were not very high on Arkansas early in the season. They've kind of played at a much higher level. I think most of that is due to Austin Allen. The one thing I'll caution is that there's a lot of signs that Ole Miss's defense is kind of falling apart. And Arkansas's defense was not very good in this game. Ole Miss kind of stopped themselves. So, I think it's still a little too early to say. I think in the past it's been the case, and it may be here, because it is an offensive line-focused unit. And in the college game, much like the pros now, due to limited practice and limited contact, offensive lines get significantly better as the season progresses. And everything about Arkansas is geared off that line, including the offensive play style. So as the line improves, the team will improve with it. And that's probably going to happen every single season. My only hesitation this year is I don't know that the line, in terms of raw talent, is all that good. So there's, I think, a lower ceiling. I'll also note that Arkansas has an unusually backloaded schedule this year. They're going to play 3 ranked teams in a row after this Ole Miss game. So that's a little rough. And then the flip side, I will say about Ole Miss, and there's going to be a lot of people taking this win away and going, well, they're really struggling, kind of falling apart. The same kind of thing happened last year. They lost to Arkansas in overtime late, and then they turn around and just curb stomped LSU. And what I'm getting at there is it's what I said earlier. The good and the bad with this style of offense is they're going to put up this 30-point game on everybody. And when they're playing an LSU or a team that doesn't have as high power on offense and doesn't score as much, they're still going to put up 30 and like a 30-10 a game, and they're going to whoop them. And when they're playing a team that is more of a shootout team like Arkansas, they may get punked if they're having an off day. And, I guess my caution in this is I think Freeze has a ceiling to how much he'll be able to accomplish in a year, and I can see the fans eventually getting frustrated with 9 and 10 win seasons, which is, I think, kind of sad given where Ole Miss has been in the past. The problem is, don't underestimate how much of a style is getting the style that got you to 9 and 10 wins. Don't underestimate that and think that, well, we'll just replace them and move up. I mean, if you get a great coach, you will, but it's just if you take away the scheme that's got them where they are, unless you have a very good coach, you very easily could step back 3 or 4 wins. Because I'm not sure, Kelly's a very good quarterback, but I'm not sure on the whole with a different style. The Ole Miss would not have been competitive with Alabama the past few years.
And like,
so that's kind of the trade-off.
Like you said, maybe not last year or this year where they had gobs of talent, but in other years, it's kind of lifted them up and neutralized some talent deficiencies and got them some wins where they otherwise wouldn't have. So I think you make a fair point there. So here's a question I'm going to pose to you, and you got to eliminate all the bias, all the preconceived notions, everything you know about what you know about these quarterbacks from years past, because there's a lot that could contribute to it. If you were basing it just on this year right now, is Austin Allen your first team All-SEC quarterback?
Yes. Right now, yes, he is. And I was thinking about that earlier. If I'm a college team and I can pick one of these 2 quarterbacks, right now I'm taking Austin Allen. Now, I think Kelly's athleticism is kind of a different – that's a special thing. Again, he's leading rusher for Ole Miss in this game. But Allen has been special. I will say as a pro passer, Allen's size is going to knock him considerably. He isn't going to go anywhere near as high as he would have if he was just 3 inches taller. But
and that's Aaron Murray at Georgia, who was a very capable thrower. And I even said, yeah, he's going to have a pro career. I know he's got some size issues, and then he got to the pros and did nothing. So I could see some of that there too.
Right, absolutely.